and welcome to Power Play on this Wednesday evening. I'm Vashi Capellos. Tonight, the countdown is on.
This is the time for experience, not experiments.
This election is about change.
You've got the power to vote for New Democrats.
With just 5 days to go, leaders are crisscrossing the country at breakneck speed to make their final pitches to voters. The debates are done, advance polls close. Is the race baked, or can it all still change? Nick Nanos will be here in moments to answer that question. Then, a fight for every vote.
I'm asking for a series of single votes from Canadians.
We cannot afford a fourth Liberal turn.
People have rejected Pierre Poilievre, and I think that's pretty clear. He's not going to win this election.
The NDP says Mark Carney will win, Pierre Poilievre will lose. But Mark Carney is being asked why he's not talking about the NDP. Our front bench will join us to break down the politics behind all of those positions coming up. Plus, could more tariff whiplash be on the way?
There is an opportunity for a big deal here.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his delegates hint at backing down from their trade war with China. Our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, will join us with the latest developments, including the impact on markets. That's coming up just a little bit later on in the program. First, though,
We need a change. This election really comes down to one word. It's change. Change, change, change. Change so you can afford food. Change so you can afford homes. Change so that you are safe in your street. This election is about change.
You know, why vote for New Democrats in this election? I'll tell you why. Because when we have power, we use it for you. We use it for people. We make people's lives better. Millions of people in our country are better off because you voted for us.
I've managed budgets before. I've managed economies before. I've managed crises before. This is the time for experience, not experiments.
with just 5 days until Election Day, party leaders, as you can see there, are spread out across the country trying to sway voters in regions where the race is tightening. According to the latest public opinion polling, the Liberals are still ahead nationally, but other parties are gaining ground in key battlegrounds, particularly in BC and Quebec. So what could that mean for the results on Election Day? And could we see any major swings in the polling in the final days of the campaign? With me now to talk more about that is Nick Nanos, Chief Data Scientist and founder at Nanos Research. Hi, Nick. Good to have you as always. When we spoke last week about some of the ups and downs that you were seeing, you had anticipated post-debate, post-long weekend, post-advance polling, that you'd have an indication of whether trend lines were solidifying. Can you go over the top line numbers that you're seeing right now?
Well, the latest CTV News Globe Mail Nanos tracking has the Liberals at 44%, the Conservatives at 39%. So, you know, the thing is that the Liberal advantage has continued throughout this whole campaign. It's not as big as it once was, which was 10 and 11 percentage points, but it's anywhere from 4, 5, 6 percentage points nationally. And, you know, the NDP, although they did see a little bit of a lift coming out of the French and the English debates, are now back down to 8% nationally, which speaks to the collapse of the New Democrats and how the Liberals had benefited by what I'll say, Jagmeet Singh and the trouble that he's having trying to get traction.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means on a more provincial, province by province basis in a second, because it might be a bit of a different story. But I wanted to just go through from the start of the campaign until now, because we've got sort of your trend line throughout the last almost 5 weeks at this point. Would you assess it or characterize it as a campaign with a lot of movement or just a little?
I think it was significant movement, especially when there are big events, like, say, for example, on Liberation Day, and Donald Trump significantly had an impact on the shape of the advantage that the Liberals had. And then what we did see is, as the focus of the campaign shifted away from Trump onto the cost of living, housing, all those other issues, that the Liberal advantage kind of narrowed. The big question now is what will happen in the close. And I think the other thing is in terms of factors that will shape especially the fortunes of Pierre Poilievre, apart from Donald Trump, I don't think you can talk about Pierre Poilievre's future without talking about Premier Doug Ford. You know, we have Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who just won a big majority mandate, part of the same Conservative family, openly questioning the strategy of Pierre Poilievre, saying words like the truth hurts and stuff like that. And, you know, it's not helpful for any party or contender to be prime minister to have people who you would think would be on the same side questioning the strategy and questioning the leadership. So why don't we just say this, Vashi, Pierre Poilievre's future His political future is influenced by Donald Trump, but also Doug Ford.
Let me sort of dig down into not just the Ford question, but different regions. Let's start with Ontario. How constant has the Liberal lead been there, and how much movement have you seen in that province?
Well, the Liberal lead in the province of Ontario, which is one of the key battlegrounds, has been, they've been anywhere from 45 to 50% in the province. So they've had basically anywhere from a 15-point lead to right now they have an 8-point advantage. Right now the Liberals are at 48%, the Conservatives are at 40%, and the NDP back are at 7%. So, the lead hasn't been as big as it has been, especially during kind of the focus on Donald Trump and Liberation Day, but it's been fairly consistent.
What about British Columbia? Because I know you were talking about the national NDP numbers, but they've seen a significant increase there, which is providing for a more competitive race, I think, than in maybe any other province at this point. Like, it's harder to predict. What is your view of what's going on there?
Well, as of last night, British Columbia is an absolute toss-up between the Liberals and the Conservatives. That we have the Liberals at 41, Conservatives at 38, NDP back at 16. But as context, Vashi, so it's a statistical toss-up, factoring the margin of error for the survey. But even for the NDP, they've marginally improved their support in the province of British Columbia. But the thing is in the last federal election, Vashi, the support for the New Democrats was in the mid-20s. So, the thing is right now we have an environment in British Columbia where it's a bit of a political feeding frenzy for the Liberals and the Conservatives on the New Democrats. And with the vote splits, it's very hard to predict who might have the upper hand when it comes to seats coming out of British Columbia.
And what about, just lastly, before I let you go, Quebec? Because jumping off sort of what's going on with the NDP, both the NDP and the Bloc have, I guess, seen their messaging evolve. They're talking now about holding the government to account, whether it be a minority or to a certain degree, a majority. And they've become very explicit. Today, Jagmeet Singh was explicit about it. On Sunday, Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, was explicit about it. Has the Bloc seen any movement, and at whose expense in Quebec?
Yeah, no, the thing is that for the Bloc Québécois, we have them at around 24% in the province of Quebec, much lower than where they traditionally at. The Liberals are at 42. Even the Conservatives are basically statistically tied with the Bloc. The NDP are way back at 3% in the province of Quebec. And this has been, for the Bloc, this could end up being one of their worst election campaigns in recent history. And it looks like what we're seeing in the province of Quebec is not necessarily just an embrace of the Liberals. It's actually more like a repudiation of Pierre Poilievre, that his style of politics and kind of his approach hasn't really gained a lot of traction. That said, at 25% in the province of Quebec, that's better than average. Perhaps the Conservatives might be able to win a couple more seats, but not any kind of significant breakthrough that could be a game changer for the Conservatives in the province of Quebec.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to leave it there. I know we'll be speaking frequently ahead of the election. Thanks for making the time. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's our pollster of record here at CTV, Nick Nanos with Nanos Research. So are the latest polling numbers prompting any of the parties to change their strategies? And what are the campaigns focusing on with just 5 sleeps until Election Day? Let's bring in a special edition of our War Room. Current and former top War Room campaign strategist Jason Leader worked in the Harper government. He's now the president of Enterprise Canada. Zita Astravas held several senior leadership roles with the Trudeau government. She's now a vice president at Wellington Advocacy and advising the Liberal campaign. And Anne McGrath rounds us out. She's a spokesperson for the NDP campaign. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Happy 5 sleeps to Election Day.
I think that sounds generous.
Yeah, I know it does. It does. Anne, I wanted to start with you, and just jumping off some of what Nick laid out in sort of, I guess, asking a little bit more about the evolution in strategy. The messaging today was very explicit, I thought, for the first time. It had definitely been hinted at strongly by Mr. Singh, but today sort of saying, like, Pierre Poilievre isn't going to win. You are safe to throw your vote to us. Do you think that message will pick up steam throughout the next few days, and what are you banking on with it?
Well, the thing is that things can change quickly in a campaign. We're in the last few days. It doesn't mean everything today is not election day, it's not voting day. So there are messages can still get through towards the end. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of New Democrat supporters are getting a little bit fatigued with the discussion about strategic voting and are sort of fighting back a little bit. And so I think that there's a little bit of, for me anyway, there's some hope in that. The other thing I should say is that the polling doesn't always take into account, especially the polling aggregators and seat projections, don't always take account of where the concentrated vote is. And so, certainly you talked a little bit there about British Columbia, for instance, and there are seats there where the incumbents are very popular, very well respected. People want to support them. And so I don't think that the picture is as dire as it looks. I think there's lots of hope still there. And I think a lot of New Democrats were really captivated by the fire that Jagmeet brought to the debates. He was very passionate and very forceful, and I think that that's what people were looking for. We had a great rally, for instance, last night in Edmonton, where Rachel Notley, who,
we could have a whole conversation about them appearing together for the first time in a long time.
She introduced him, they hugged. It was a very beautiful moment for me.
I bet it was. Jason, I wanted to get your take on something else Nick brought up, which is the degree to which things have moved when there is movement in the ballot box question. And it has been, I think, the one constant throughout the campaign is this tension between, is it about Trump or is it about change or maybe the Liberals' record? The Conservatives really seem to have focused on, like that clip we played from Pierre Poilievre, change, 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 right? Like that word is on the front of the platform now. Like that messaging seems to have solidified in the last 10 days of the campaign. Is it your view that that's the one they think will punch through the most in this last stretch?
Yeah, there's no subtlety there. It's change, change, change. And I will say, Poilievre's not known for his subtlety. And by the way, Anne, I found some art with some blue and some orange behind me to just make sure that, I'm cheering for the NDP in some seats and the Tories and some others as well. So I thought you'd like that. I'll say this, Vashi. The change message is the only one that can win the election for Mr. Poilievre. And I think he's trying to get Canadians to look sort of deep at the last 10 years, right? So they had a couple weeks to get used to Mr. Carney, and they liked what they saw in terms of the resume. They liked what seniors especially liked what they saw in terms of the gray hair. And now he's sort of like, it's getting down to it. We got to make a decision here. And the question that I think Poilievre is asking, which is I think the right one, which is, how'd you like the last 10 years? Because, you can dress it up, he's going to say a lot of things, but same ministers, same policies. By the way, the same platform, for goodness sakes. I mean, that platform was literally just cut and paste or copy out of Trudeau's. So I think the Liberals are going to have a hard time. Listen, they might win this election, but they're going to have a hard time making the case for a difference. And Mr. Carney, the more the campaign goes on, the less he looks new and the more he looks just like the last government. And I think that's good for Poilievre. He's got a little momentum in his sails. Let's see if it's going to carry through to Monday.
Yeah, I'd love to put that thesis to you, Zita, and get your perspective on it, because I was saying earlier on my rodeo program this morning, a person stopped me in the rotunda here where I work, downtown Ottawa. He was a Liberal. He's very enthused to see the Liberals doing as well as they are. But his proposition was, he's door knocking for them. And when he said, if this election were 2 months later, I don't know if we would win. Like he really was seeing at the door sort of the impact over time of a declining enthusiasm, which was admittedly very high at the beginning. What are your thoughts? Do you think that's true? Do you think if this election were 6 months from now, it would be a different situation?
Well, I mean, you just heard from Nick Nanos, look at 2 months from now, there was a ton of 2 months ago, there was a ton of movement in the polls. And what we've seen is some stability in the polls during the election campaign. And certainly the last couple of days of the campaign matter. You see Mark Carney going on the offensive. He's gone to Vancouver Island twice, which I think is quite telling of a Liberal campaign. I think there's a lot of seats in play there for the Liberals, and really I think for the Conservatives in the north part of the island and for the Liberals in Victoria and south part of the island. And he's in Cloverdale tonight. In British Columbia. No secret that there's some seats to gain in British Columbia for Mr. Carney, and he's going after them. And you'll see him touch both coasts again. on an offensive posture, really looking to pick up some seats. And you know, I wouldn't count Alberta out. I know the Conservatives didn't bother to add agriculture or farmers to their platform, Jason. I know Anne and I took note of that as Albertans.
The Liberals are known for their support for farmers. Now let's campaign on that.
You know, but I think, but you know what though, Jason, like I think in Alberta there are some competitive ridings for the Liberals, which, you know, something 2 months ago was not, we weren't talking about that. So I really think you'll see a quick campaign from Mr. Carney across the coast, and really looking at those Conservative and those NDP seats that are definitely in play for pickups, and we'll see on Monday. It's really important.
Zita,
that
you have to take a plane.
Right?
You have to take a plane from. You have to take a plane. From
Let her finish. I'll get you right back. I promise. I promise.
You know, I think it's one of those things where, you know, it's a competitive race. The numbers are close, and it's really important, Vashi, to that voter that you talked to today, that every vote does come out, particularly in those really tight 3 or 4-way splits across the country, which have really started to manifest themselves. You know, I think there's a number of seats in play, but they're going to come down to the wire in the last couple of days, and certainly on election day. So we'll see. We'll see Mr. Carney on the hustings and really go on the offensive on those pickup seats that are really possible.
Jason, go for it. Cut you off.
No, I was laughing because Zita was mentioned agriculture, and I said, you know, the Liberal Party. I mean, basically, you have to take a bus, a train, a plane, and like possibly walk a little bit to get to a farm.
It's a huge absence, Jason.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Zita.
Let me ask you a little, just before I get back to Anne, let me just pick up on what Zita's talking about. If their strategy towards the end is to go on the offense, where there are seats they believe that they might not traditionally have been able to pick up, but might have a chance to, what is the Tories, what are the Conservatives' strategy in these last number of days? What are they deploying?
I think you'll see less of, you know, the showmanship of that kind of geography. You know, sometimes we over-index on where candidates go, because the truth is sometimes it's smart to go to a place. Sometimes it's not that smart, right? It takes away resources. You have a big rally somewhere, or if you try to get people zoomed up, but it's, you know, you take people off the doors, you take volunteers off the phone banks, all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the geography of the Conservative campaign, but I will say, I don't think there's going to be many surprises there, Vashi. The Greater Toronto area and the Lower Mainland of BC, the Greater Vancouver area, and a few more other places are the place where this election is going to be won and lost. You saw Nick's numbers there. Pierre's got some work to do in Ontario and in the GTA. The GVR, the Greater Vancouver area, is very competitive. And I think what Pierre is, you know, the other thing too, Vashi, a third of the votes are already in the box, right? We had 7.5 million votes go in over Easter weekend. You know, we're going to have probably short of 20 million votes go over the next little bit. So, you know, for that last 14 million votes, that last 12 million votes or whatever, you've really got to, I think Pierre and his team are counting on how excited people are to vote for him. There is an enthusiasm gap. I'm noticing on the Liberals are a little less enthusiastic about Mr. Carney than they were a couple of months ago when he was like just a resume, and now he's a real person and they see his faults. And Mr. Poilievre, I think, since the debate, has had a really good week or two, and they're counting on that enthusiasm gap to make up some of this polling disadvantage that they've got.
I'll get Zita to respond to that in a moment, but Anne, on the NDP, if you're talking strategy in these last 5 days, like what is it all about the incumbents, or will it be beyond that?
It'll be a bit beyond that for sure, because there are some other seats that are possibly in play. I think that in the last few days, it is all about enthusiasm. It is about, I think for us, it's got to be making it clear that Pierre Poilievre is not going to win this campaign, despite the fact that they were measuring the drapes for a year or two before the campaign. Mr. Carney is definitely benefiting from a short campaign, but I think we have to sow the seeds of doubt there about who he is, whether he should have a blank check, or whether or not he needs some checks and balances. And we have a system that actually is built to have checks and balances. And so I don't think that people are going to be all that comfortable, particularly, you know, a lot of for us is bringing those New Democrats back and pointing out that when Liberals have free rein, things don't go well for people. And we have examples of that. Libby Davies pointed to it at the rally in Vancouver the other night, that in 1993, when we lost party status and the Liberals had a massive majority, they cut health care, they got rid of the housing program, they transformed EI to the point that now most workers don't even qualify for EI. So, you know, there are dangers in letting the Liberals have a blank check.
Are the Liberals, Zita, last word to you, worried about that message potentially resonating, that the support that has essentially, you know, clinched this for them has been from the NDP? Like the exodus from the NDP has gone straight to the Liberals, which has meant that 39% support for the Conservatives will not, at this point, at least according to the polls, translate into a majority government. Are you worried about any of that support peeling back and allowing for a different outcome?
Well, I would say, Vashi, like, we're talking about the NDP. If you look at, there is some bleed from the Bloc Québécois to the Liberals in Quebec as well. I know Nick was talking about the BQ numbers, and that's an important battleground. Honestly, it's nose to the grindstone, right? Like, there's been a lot of momentum on the Liberal campaign. The campaign organization on election day is quite strong. Same with advanced polls. I think it's a bit passing strange that Jason's now talking the inverse around rallies. But you know, I think you'll see that momentum, like those volunteers, really come out on election day. And you know, with a number of seats that are so close, you know, 20, 25 seats that are kind of on the bubble, those are election day ridings that we're really looking at. And I think to Anne's point, you know, it's important that Mr. Carney put that positive message forward. He is the best to deal with Donald Trump and the White House administration, not just for the next couple months, but for the duration of Mark Carney's administration and President Trump's administration. And that is a message that is resonating with Canadians coast to coast to coast. I think you'll see him drive that message, but also nose to the grindstone. Get the volunteers out, get everyone to the polls. There's enthusiasm at the polls, and I think we really need to capture that in the last stretch.
All right, I'll leave it on that note. 5 sleeps, everyone. Thank you so much for making time for the conversation. I appreciate it. Zita Astorvas, Jason Leader, and Anne McGrath, our War Room panel. We're going to talk about what things could look like after the election with our front bench just a bit later on in the program. Sharon Card, Jamie Ellerton, Carl Belanger, and Laura Stone will be here. First, though, we're going to head to Washington. Is Donald Trump backing down on his trade war with China? Amanda Lang, our chief financial correspondent, will be here to talk about the possibility of that and how markets are being impacted. Welcome back to Power Play, a live look at this moment at the White House in Washington, D.C., where President Donald Trump is inside signing a series of executive orders. We are, of course, waiting to hear what he has to say about tariffs on China, because there are recent indications he is set to soften his stance and decrease those tariffs substantially. We're expecting to hear from him with some new comments any moment. We'll bring you the latest when it happens. The news coming out, though, of the White House this week is once again leading to a lot of volatility in the markets. Stocks plunged Monday after Trump called the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, a, quote, major loser for not lowering interest rates faster. But today, markets jumped after Trump said he has no intention of firing Powell and after the president hinted that the U.S. and China, as I mentioned, could be moving closer to a deal of sorts. Here's a look at how the markets closed today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average settled at nearly 420 points. The S&P 500 added about 88. The NASDAQ nearly 408 points, and the TSX 167. Earlier today, before he signed those executive orders, Trump was speaking to reporters and again appeared to open the door to trade talks with China.
We are going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing. They know that they can't get away with it any longer, but they're still going to do fine.
Our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, is here to talk a bit more about what all of this means. Hi, Amanda. Good to see you.
Hi.
Another week of volatility on the markets. If I could start with Jerome Powell and why this is leading to ups and downs. First of all, it seems like Trump is very critical of him publicly, which we're not used to seeing in their respective roles, around the pace at which interest rates are going down or not. Why is that having such a direct impact on markets?
Trump's even gone further than being critical of kind of the decision making, which you can sometimes you do get politicians. We see it in this country too, Vashi, kind of weighing in on what the central bank should or shouldn't do. Trump took it to he might terminate. He said, I can't wait for his termination, or it can't come soon enough. It rattled the markets. There isn't actually an easy path for the president of the United States to remove the Fed chair. But in a time when the whole world is on edge about what this particular White House will do, the Fed is, the central bank there, is sort of seen as this kind of island of stability. It managed, as did our central bank, it managed through the pandemic and the inflation that followed it really well. And if you fired Jerome Powell, I mean, the markets would just go haywire. And Trump likely heard from a number of very serious players about what that would do to U.S. treasuries, to the U.S. dollar. Stocks would be the least of our worries if he did that with the Fed chair. So backing off that probably came as the result of a whole bunch of advice.
the rhetoric that's being employed now by him and his delegates on the financial files, like Scott Bessent, for example, is also kind of remarkable, right? Like a major softening of their stance. I don't want to be the bad guy. I don't want to get in a trade war with China. What do you think is informing that? And ultimately, do you anticipate, I mean, it's hard to tell, but do you think that is a more permanent change in posture?
Yeah, I suspect that it is, and I suspect, Vashi, it gets them close to where they wanted, which is some form of new relationship and tariffs with China, but not this all-out war. We do know that on Monday, some of the CEOs of the biggest big box stores, so Walmart, Target, Home Depot, were in the White House with a closed-door meeting with the president, and they said, we've got weeks until we have empty shelves, until we have dislocation that will send prices skyrocketing. You've got to stop it, because, of course, they get a lot of the consumer goods from China. This is where the tariffs, of course, really become illogical. It's one thing to put a tariff on something when you make it yourself. You're protecting your own industry. If you don't make it at all and your only option is to bring it in, well, then you're just going to not have it on the store shelves. So the dialing back of the rhetoric, very welcome. You saw that in stocks today. And again, you're going to have people saying, yet more uncertainty, yet again, lack of knowledge about where all of this is going. But at least I guess we'll say it's moving in the right direction, especially for countries like Canada, which do hope to negotiate a path. So softening, I guess, is a good thing.
So we are on the cusp, perhaps, no matter who wins, of even a week from now beginning some sort of new negotiations. What kind of things are you going to be watching for in the coming weeks in terms of figuring out what the impact of all this uncertainty is on our economy?
The biggest question will be, do we move immediately to reopen the USMCA or CUSMA? Do we say, look, it's coming up in a year or so anyway, let's just get right down to brass tacks and rewrite this thing? Or do we try to reach some kind of settlement right now on sort of the nitty-gritty of what we're facing at the moment, the $60 billion we still have in place in tariffs, the auto tariffs that are even now we're seeing some changing in those rules. It's all very complex. And that is going to be really interesting to see in that first phone call with our new prime minister and the president. What happens? Do we actually say we want a whole new deal, or do we do some incremental negotiating? And that's going to be a big difference in how it affects our economy.
Yeah, great point. Okay, Amanda, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your analysis this evening. I appreciate it. Our
Thanks,
chief
Patrick.
financial correspondent here at CTV News, Amanda Lang. We're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, a battle over the ballot box question with just 5 days left until Election Day. Is the focus shifting away from Trump? Our front bench will join us after that break to talk about that more. There they are. Back in a moment with them.
The biggest thing in this election is who's going to stand up to President Trump. And is it we're going to send Pierre Poilievre or me to face President Trump in those negotiations?
This is a jaw-dropping report to be published by the Government of Canada. The report says that in 2040, more people may struggle to afford rent, bills, and groceries on housing. In 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many.
We got 5 days left. I didn't hear any bell. Did you guys hear a bell? This fight's not over. We're here fighting every single day. There's 5 days left in this thing. And people need to know who's going to fight for me.
Welcome back to Power Play. As the NDP, as you heard there, fights to hold on to the seats it has, the Liberals and Conservatives are fighting over the ballot box question. Is Trump fading from the minds of voters as the campaign enters its final stretch, or is the trade war and who is best positioned to lead Canada through it still top of mind? Let's talk about that with our front bench. Sharon Carr is former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. She's now a partner at Sovereign Advisory and advising the Liberal campaign. Jamie Ellerton is a Conservative strategist and the founder and principal of Encampments. Former interim NDP National Director Carl Bélanger is with us. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. And Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. She rounds us out this evening. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I want to pick up on the language employed by Jagmeet Singh today, because there's that clip and there's another one we're going to play later, Carl. What is your take on what, like, the bell hasn't rung, 5 more, like, what is your take on what the NDP is essentially trying to do right now?
Well, I mean,
the other option is worse, right? The other option is to give up. It's over. We're done. So of course you got to fight till the very end, and you got to try to motivate your voter. And you know, from what I understand, is that the NDP Get Out the Vote operation was in very good shape over the Easter weekend for the advanced polls. So they're confident in that regard. And you know, we saw in Ontario that a Get Out the Vote operation can do wonders. In Ontario, in the provincial election, the NDP was 10 points behind the Liberals, but won as twice as many seats. So the federal NDP is hoping not to win twice as many seats as the federal Liberals, but to win seats where people are discounting them. Right. And they're counting on their machine. And so Jagmeet Singh is going around the country motivating his base, but also motivating the volunteers, the people who will get those voters to the voting booth, and to try to win as many seats as possible and hold on to party status.
Do you have a gut feeling about whether or not that will be successful, just to follow up?
Well, it depends on how organic the vote will be. You know, what we saw during the advanced pollings, there was a lot of people, but the machines were in full, display. They were working really hard. Will they show up now on E-Day? That's the question. And the more organic it is, the less likely the NDP will be to be successful.
Sharon, I thought today of all days, both Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney were like the most explicit about what their pitch is to voters and what they think the closing argument is. For Mr. Carney, it was experience, not experiments. For Mr. Poilievre, it was change, 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 change. Ultimately, how competitive do you think those two things are?
Well, I think they both can be right to a certain extent. When we talk about change, this is going to be a change election. What kind of change is that? I think for the Liberals, it's a change from the previous Liberal Party and somebody who is actually going to take on Donald Trump. For the Conservatives, they are pushing for a change campaign to change it from the Liberals. Whether or not that message is going to resonate, I think at the end of the day, the one and only message that everyone is truly focused at, even though we're not talking about it as much, is what does it mean to be working with Trump? We talk about affordability. The Conservatives have been out talking about affordability. And to state the obvious, every level of affordability is going to be impacted even more so with the constant threat of tariffs and the markets moving. So I think that the messages are kind of the same to a certain extent, but it's what kind of change do you want? And for, I think, the Liberals and for us, it's a change to make sure that we have a new Liberal Party with a new leader and are going to be there to fight Trump.
I sort of think there has been some evolution on the significance of Trump, Jamie, and I'd love to get your perspective as well. I feel like on the moments when he was right in our face on tariffs, it was a big deal. When Mark Carney was Prime Minister, people were thinking about it a lot. I would say in the last 10 days or so, I think the reason the Conservatives are getting more traction on their message around change is because people have the opportunity to even think about that more than, or at least the same as they were worried about our sovereignty, for example. Like that is, I say that based on the feedback I get. I always refer to it on radio, where it was all about Trump the first 2 weeks of the campaign, and I'm getting tons of texts from viewers. We have like a text board who that message of change is like reminding them of how they felt last year.
I think that's partially right, Vashi. I think kind of what you saw, the biggest shift of this actually happened before the writ period, and the polls, although they fluctuated, have been fairly consistent. And so when Mark Carney became Prime Minister, embodied change by scrapping the carbon tax on day one in office and talking about some other things, including actually growing the economy. I would notice tout le monde on parle appearance, where he said his biggest difference is he actually effectively cares about the economy, whereas implying that Justin Trudeau did not. He is trying to embody that, but I think the more that Trump has pushed to the back burner, the more I think you're looking at some more conventional dynamics that you've seen, and the Conservatives are chipping away a bit at that, but it is not enough to make the NDP relevant, and it looks like they've been unable to close that gap. And so this really, for the Conservatives here, I think in these dying days, are to perform as best you can, continue to chip away at people who have gone back to the Liberal fold, who just 3 months ago were wanting change, and continue to make the case as how Conservatives are going to deliver that. In addition to the change message, I don't think it's an accident that the kind of sub-theme they're really focusing on this week is crime and safety and the endorsement of union votes to try and consolidate it as much as they can.
Laura, you've been, I know, at some of the various rallies and campaign stops. What's your impression of how they're trying to close this out from a messaging perspective?
Well, I think certainly Donald Trump has not been as dominant in the second half of the campaign, and that's because he hasn't been talking about Canada's sovereignty as much. We haven't had any kind of manic episodes with threats of tariffs and pulling back in charts. I think he's always in the background, of course. in dealing with Canada, but I would agree that it's not as prevalent as it was. I think that the campaign is primarily about trust and which leader voters trust with all of these issues that we're talking about, Canada's future, affordability, our own economy, and dealing with the United States and U.S. President Trump. So I think that's kind of the final pitch that we're seeing from all of the leaders is, who do you want to tackle all of these issues, and kind of culminating with all of the platform releases. Certainly the Conservatives feel like they have a leg up on the message of change, and I think they're trying to walk a fine line between being a hopeful, positive party, the new face of Pierre Poilievre, literally smiling more, and trying to also kind of paint Canada as a dystopian hellscape. And we're seeing a lot of references to the government report that he's brought up for the past couple of days. So how is he trying to close this gap? I think he's trying to remind people perhaps of their dissatisfaction with the previous Liberal government, with the previous 10 years, without sounding too dour or too much of a downer, which I don't think Canadians want to hear right now.
Just really quickly, Sharon, I wanted to get your take. I just have a minute left, but I found also over the past few days, Mark Carney has been more like pointed towards, I don't know if that's too kind a word, but like very much going at Poilievre, more so than I had noticed throughout the rest of the campaign.
Well, listen, I think he's truly getting settled into that political role. He's very comfortable when it comes to talking about the economy. And we know that he is a new politician, and he is getting more comfortable on the political rhetoric that's going on out there. But I will just say is that we've been talking a lot about how the message has shifted and changed. And I've got to state the obvious here. We went through a period of time where all we were talking about was our sovereignty, getting annexed, our water, and being the 51st state, and governor this, governor that. And guess what? The message has changed because someone has been able to temper Donald Trump, and that somebody has been Mark Carney. So I think to a certain extent, yes, we are seeing a bit of a shift in the messaging and it being a change election. But what we have seen is the Prime Minister and the leader of the Liberal Party prove that he has been able to take that temperature down to allow the other conversations to take place.
Carl might not be convinced.
Well, it might not be Mark Carney. It might be Daniel Smith who finally got through the Trump Republicans and told Donald Trump to calm down to El Poilievre.
Or perhaps it was actually markets just like absolutely like blowing up and the U.S. economy risk cratering, right? Like,
or it was
that seems to be what actually pushed Trump back from the cliff.
Okay, save your fire. We've got another round. We'll take a quick break. Our front bench is back after that break.
Are you asking for a majority government?
I'm asking for a series of single votes from Canadians for a Liberal Party that is determined to build the country if we are given that honor.
We cannot afford another 15 years of Liberal inflation and depression. We need a change, and that's why we're here offering that change.
People have rejected Pierre Poilievre, and I think that's pretty clear. He's not going to win this election. But do you want Mark Carney to have all the power? What do you think is going to happen if Mark Carney has all the power?
Public opinion polling suggests this election has become largely a two-horse race, and as of just today, both the NDP and Bloc Québécois are explicitly acknowledging that, even going so far to say that they're expecting the Liberals to form government. Both Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet are now asking voters to elect their MPs to prevent a Liberal majority, or at least temper the Liberal government's power, in their view. Is that message getting through to voters? We'll talk about that with our front bench. They're back: Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Carl Bélanger, and Laura Stone. Laura, I wanted to start off just with that clip. That's our colleague Michael Couture asking Mark Carney, if he's asking Canadians for a majority. I'm like a bit surprised, to be honest, that they haven't pivoted to a message around that. Why do you think it is?
First of all, nice try, Mike. A for effort. Look, I mean, I think throughout this campaign, the Liberals have really been trying to lower expectations. I think probably coming into this, they're probably blown away, quite frankly, by the fact that they've been able to rebound in the way that they have with Mark Carney as the leader. They were facing certain defeat with Justin Trudeau, and things have really turned around according to the polling. I think they want to seem cautiously optimistic and emphasis on the cautious. I think they don't want to come across as arrogant or entitled, which is probably how, the public might see a certain version of the Liberal Party. I know Mark Carney, as we talked about in the last panel, has been getting more pointed with Pierre Poilievre and seeming more confident as a politician. But I just think this is about not getting ahead of your skis, not trying to portray yourself as the entitled party of Canada when you've just held power for 10 years. So I think that's probably what's behind it, and they're probably looking at the polls, wishing and hoping and thinking they have a majority on their hands. We'll see what happens, but I think that they don't want to portray that message to the masses quite yet.
I wonder also, Jamie, the degree to which they're worried about the softness of support from more progressive voters. And I'm just going to play, before I get your take on that, an ad that we got our hands on, their newest ad. They, sources in the party say it's their best tested ad. And it is very much directed at more progressive voters who they would like to see come over, obviously, to the Liberals on election day. Let's play a little bit of that ad.
I met a teacher in Georgetown, Ontario. And she told me about a routine assignment that she had given to her 9- and 10-year-olds. And the children were asked to describe their dreams for Canada. So some kids wrote about a country free of poverty, others dreamt of clean air and water, but many also wrote about tariffs and threats to our sovereignty. Words that I hadn't met at that age. And I'm going to quote one.
First of all, as I said earlier, I need to meet these 10-year-olds who are talking about tariffs. My stepson was focused solely on video games at that age, and I don't know. Sound like amazing kids. We played in the clips off the top of the segment, Jamie, that the NDP is explicitly saying, like, you can feel safe voting for us because you don't have to be worried, in their view, about Pierre Poilievre. Do you think there is any concern among Liberals about the possibility of that actually happening?
Yeah, I think this goes wide to Laura's point of why they're being so cautiously optimistic. If the Liberals sound triumphant and they're taking their victory lap before this thing is over, it's a signal that the kind of threat that they've essentially spent the past 2 months talking about has indeed been defeated, and it kind of totally undermines their ballot question. And so I think when you look at the progressive center-left, and even the far left, and get into Quebec with the sovereignty question as to who's going to be the prime minister and what kind of mandate that looks like. Mark Carney's like tightrope walking a very fine line on managing expectations to project confidence without getting into the Liberal hubris.
I thought that the platform release as well, Sharon, and I'd love to get your perspective, spoke a little bit strategically to the same thing that this ad is, insofar as the need for the Liberals, in order to make what the public opinion polling says is true actually be true, the need for them to rely on more progressive voters. Because I think the criticism about that platform was that, and you heard it from other people, that it felt like this was Justin Trudeau's platform. It didn't feel like the way in which Mark Carney has been speaking for the past few months. But it seems like there's if there is a strategy there, it's to allay any concerns from the progressive side of the country about what might happen if he does win.
Yes, and I do think that there is an aspect of that in the platform. But we also have to remember the principles of the Liberal Party and what we as a party stand for. I would say that with a mixture of the platform, if you compare the Liberal platform to the Conservative platform that just came out, we're looking at night and day difference in what is being offered. And the Liberal platform, while it is addressing the issue of Trump and what the impact of that is going to be, it's also addressing the other issues around affordability, homes, building homes, and everything else. They're not just leaving everything else off the table. Whereas Pierre Poilievre's, I would say, platform, as someone who worked at the Department of Finance for 5 years, it's a really confusing platform because no one does costing that way. And it's all about his singular message. It's not actually talking about how he's going to get where he needs to get in a realistic way. And just to a point of that video, of the commercial you just played, I think what's really important for people to remember is that the Prime Minister and Mr. Carney's, he's not a retail politician. He is somebody who's come from the outside, and he is not a divisive person. And that tone and tenor was shown in that commercial. That is the type of person he is. And I know the Conservatives want to sling mud at him because he's educated. He's had high-level jobs. But at the end of the day, that is who he is as a person. And we're seeing that in the policies that were put forward in the platform, because he does care about some of those progressive policies, but also cares about a fiscal anchor on top of not being divisive. So I'm not that surprised.
I have to be fair and say there's a lot of weird math in the Liberal platform too. The dividing of budgets, for example. It's not like they can escape from the kind of criticism you just levied at the Conservatives. I think I got to be fair.
And they can't. And I think that everyone should be open to that criticism. And I know we talk about the operating costs and all that stuff, and I think they're going to have to answer to that. But it's quite different.
Sharon, my friend, quit while you're ahead.
It's quite different than what Pierre Poilievre and team have done here. So we can do the math later. I don't think any of us here are mathematicians.
Well, that's why we're on TV, obviously, because of our strong math background. Carl, I wanted to ask you about particularly the pitch to the progressive voters of the country. And I guess, do you think they might at all be worried about any bleeding of support, or this is just them trying to solidify what is the softer portion of their vote?
Well, there's a strategic choice that was made. At the beginning of the campaign, when Mark Carney arrived, they were going hard after the blue Liberals, right? They were carbon tax, capital gains. They were going with those measures. Mark Carney sounded like a progressive conservative. But those blue Liberals who were with the Conservatives because they wanted change, they seem to be going back slightly with the Conservative. So what the Liberals are doing is kind of the flip coin of the flip coin of what the NDP and the Bloc is doing, which is we need voters to still be scared of a possible Poilievre Conservative majority government. Therefore, we're going to go after the progressive voters and remind them. And that's why we're not saying we are going after a majority, because we want people to be reminded what could happen. The flip side, of course, the NDP and the Bloc are trying to reassure voters, you can stay with us because it's guaranteed that the Liberals will win a government. They're not saying majority, but they'll win a government. So that's what's at play here. And it's interesting because in the pool of voters that's available to the Liberals, they need 2, 3, 4 points to secure a majority. And they've decided to go to the left as opposed to the right. Maybe they've decided that the blue Liberals, the switch voters, are gone and they're back with Pierre Poilievre.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the discussion. Jamie Ellerton, Sharon Carr, Laura Stone, and Carl Belanger. We're back in just a moment with more Power Play just ahead. Welcome back to Power Play on this Wednesday evening. Tens of thousands of people gathered today in Vatican City to pay their respects to Pope Francis. I can take you now to a live look of St. Peter's Basilica this evening. This is where the pontiff is now lying in state in an open coffin. Large crowds of mourners are expected over the next 3 days. There is a ton of ceremony involved. Really, people have been waiting hours and hours to say goodbye to the Pope in long lines. He passed away at the age of 88 following months of illness on Monday, though he did greet a big crowd in St. Peter's Square on Sunday. The formal funeral for the Pope will be held on Saturday, and we now know who will be attending on Canada's behalf. There was questions about whether Mark Carney in his capacity as Prime Minister would go. Of course, we're in the middle of a campaign, so that would be notable if it were the case. Instead, Governor General Mary Simon, you just saw a picture of her, will be traveling to Vatican City to represent Canada. Alongside what we are told is a senior delegation. The Governor General, as you can see there, did meet the Pope when he visited Canada back in 2022. At that time, he offered an apology to the survivors of residential schools for the Catholic Church's role in those schools. He was the first Pope, actually, to visit Canada in 20 years when he did so back in 2022. I just want to remind you a little bit of our election coverage Monday night starting at 7 o'clock Eastern. I'll be there alongside my colleague Omar Sachedina and a host of really, really smart people to analyze those results as they come in live on our watch. I'm going to leave Power Play there tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Have a wonderful rest of your night.